Pleasant. Yeah, sure. Pleasant good afternoon, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here and such an honor to be here. I was very excited when I was given the invitation. Though it was late notice, I know this was something compulsory that I had to do. Thank you again for being here. Of course, it's during our lunch period. I can see some persons enjoying some good food in the background. It smells good as well. But today, one of the things that our dear colleague did not share is that apart from all the things that is added to your name, sometimes the most important thing for you is your family. And for me, being a parent is one of the most important part of the roles for me as an individual. So today our discussion will evolve quite a lot on parental rights, because I believe every one of us believe that parents have fundamental human rights, not only moral rights, but also legal rights as well. I'm going to just ask the question because a number of us are here. How many persons here are parents? Just a raise of hands. Wow. Okay, very good. And how many persons do have parents? Yes. So it tells us how closely connected that we are in this universe. It tells us how closely are we connected within our society, that we do not live on an island on ourselves, but we are all connected. And as such, it is one of the reasons why we are all here today. Something happened that triggered us to be here together. Something touched our inner consciousness to let us know that something unethical, something unconstitutional, and something, in some cases, illegal may have occurred. And that in itself tells us that we need to have those conversations. Now, today I will be very informal, and please allow me to be. Hopefully we get our IT person to help me with the projector so that we can have the discussion. I hope you can see me through the podium. I'm a little short. Next time I'll walk with my bench so that we can see what is happening. But many times when we think of parental rights, hopefully it comes on. Okay, we're just having a little technical, but we'll be there shortly. But I will go ahead as we're here. Many times when we think about parental rights, we usually think about those biological rights, those fundamental rights that all parents ought to have. And of course, we as a society, we usually expect certain responsibilities of parents. We also expect parents to conduct themselves in a particular way. And so we place a lot of emphasis on parental responsibility, but not primarily parental rights. And this is what we will be discussing this evening. Of course, we will have the opportunity to ask questions at the end of the day. Now, I have been practicing the Bajan dialect since last night, and I hope I get it right this time. But this term has been very popular very lately, yes? And it reminds me, because most of you may not know, but I'm St. Lucian, but we make those terms quite a lot. And it comes from parents, particularly when you're doing something wrong. Not about here. Don't do that. Don't touch that. We don't expect that. This dialect, very Caribbean, but it touches the very core of every individual, because it tells us that something unaccepted, in some cases something unethical, and in some other cases it could be we do not accept that type of behavior. So I'm sure most of us that have been here, when you've been told by your parents, you'd usually see that finger coming out. Yes? That finger, don't do this, don't do that. Because it tells you that there is an ethical concern or there was some kind of behavioral problem that we do not expect you to do. So when I heard the term, and we keep hearing it a lot in our society, it reminds us that something very wrong has occurred. Something alarming has occurred. And we all have to awaken those senses to know exactly what had occurred. So today what we will be discussing is something that seems, even to this day, that has been ignored. The aspect of parental rights. There have been several arguments, there have been several positions, and as we've seen in the media, we've seen quite a number of various discussions as to what is parental rights, what is consent, and quite controversial again, the Data Protection Act. Yes, we heard about that? Yes, and we'll be discussing some of that as well. But the question is, what is parental rights? What are those fundamental rights that parents in particular are granted? And that is universal in and of itself. So we can say that parental rights are human rights. And why are they human rights? Because they are given to us because we are fundamental human beings. And most of us can agree that those rights are ordained by God, yes? And these are fundamental aspects. They're given to us because we also acclaim that we are rational beings, we are thinking beings. And so parents have that special responsibility to groom their children, to ensure that they are well fed, they are taken, that they go to school, and also that they are good citizens. One of the things that comes to mind, usually when something happens with the youth, we usually say, where are the parents? Yes? Where are the mothers? Where are the fathers? Where are the society members? Where are the community leaders? Because indirectly, we are all parents. We are all responsible for our children, the children of our nation. So regardless of what happens and how we groom our children in our homes, every child becomes our responsibility. So we cannot say, well, it happened to those children, but it didn't happen to our children. But how do we know it will not happen to our children? And that is the question that we need to ask ourselves. These are very serious matters that I think that needs very thorough investigations. And as we go along, we will see why that parental rights is not only a human right, but it's also a legal right. And I think that is what the question needs to be. How are we going to redress some of the questions and concerns that parents are now experiencing? There are parents that have never experienced what they're going through right now. There are people in the community that have never experienced what is happening at this point. And of course, there are children, those children, and even children that were not affected by it, were affected in some aspect as well. So the idea is that those fundamental rights, those human rights, they are fundamental to you, myself, and anybody. It does not matter what political party you support. It does not matter what religious church you support. It does not matter your socio or economic background. It is fundamental because you're a human person. And I'm sure we can also say that there are certain characteristics that makes us different from other beings, yes? Yes, including machines, including computers. That aspect of our faculty having the ability to think and rationalize and critically think about our everyday situations. But what is more important is that we have something called interest. Every individual have an interest. And even here we may have our own interests as well. Some may have interest in politics, some may have interest in religion, some may have interest in food. Some may have interest in gardening, like myself. I love to garden. So that is one of the things that makes us fundamental. But that human right is something that no state can take away from you. They can say, well, yes, we grant you human rights, but they can't take it away from you. There are other provisions when they can. Of course, if you commit certain offenses, that would be some of the situations. If you're committing harm against other people, yes. But there are clear philosophical discussions and tenets and doctrines that tells us that the state does not have the right to infringe on civil liberty, on their fundamental human rights. And it is one of the reasons why we have our Constitution. That is fundamental. Because it is there that our rights are protected against the state. Because sometimes the state may take various approaches, and sometimes the idea is that if the state believes that it is in their best benefit or best interest, then they may be able to, slightly infringe on those rights. But as philosophers like John Stuart Mill tells you, the only reason why the state has that right to infringe on your fundamental human rights is if you will be harming someone, if there is any element of harm. So they cannot infringe on some fundamental rights. And I think it's very important that persons understand those rights as well. The other aspect of it is not only that it is something that is fundamental because you're human, but the aspect that it is universal. So when something or a violation of human rights is done, whether it's in your own society or other societies have the right to say, wait a minute, you were infringing on the rights of your citizens. Do you think that is acceptable? Because what they say is that at the end of the day, we are all connected. So it's very important that those rights are also universal. It cannot be subjective. And when we say subjective, meaning only a certain society should have certain types of laws to protect persons. It must be universal. It must be universal so that everybody becomes aware. And of course, as I said before, those rights are inherent to us, not based upon nationality, not based on sex or ethnic group or religion or language or status, and in some cases, ages. Because as we come along, we will see there are some societies or some even individuals believe that children do not have rights, that they're small, they're small people. Because we're the adults, because we're the ones in authority, we're the ones that should have or make certain types of claims or provisions for them. So it's very important that when we speak about parental rights, we also include children's rights. Because we cannot have children if we don't have parents who care for them, right? Yeah. It would almost seem invalid to think that way. So in order for us to protect the children, we have to protect the rights of parents. We have to ensure that those rights are very clear so that we don't have all those kinds of, I would say, discrepancies in the law, discrepancies in policies, so that persons are not concerned or some persons are not aware that it is a right that you get parental consent. Yes? That the state does not particularly own your children. They're there to provide protection. They're there to provide some services. And if in some cases, we're seeing where some parents, they may go for various challenges when the state may have the right to step in and provide different provisions for those children. But at the end of the day, the primary caretaker of children are their parents, their guardians. Yes, whether it's biological or whether it's through adoption or legal ways. And so we have to be very clear as a society about those as well. The other aspect, of course, of those fundamental rights is the right to life, of course, the right to education, the rights to food, the rights to liberty, and what's important, as we said before, in terms of freedom of expression and, of course, freedom to engage in any kinds of activity. So the idea is that everyone has the right to respect for his or her private and family life. That's a fundamental human right. And as we go along to data protection laws, we will see why that is fundamental. It is your household. You can't, in this day and age, tell people about how they should have their lives or their families. And even in our societies, we have those freedoms where persons can have how many children they would like and how they would like to structure their family. That is a fundamental right. So many of the things that we take for granted, we assume that most persons are aware of that, but this is your fundamental rights. And people ought to know that as well. The other aspect of it is that public authorities, and I really like that one, public authorities are not allowed or not permitted to interfere with those fundamental rights, with those fundamental human rights. As I said before, the only reason why they can do that is if somebody breaks the law or if somebody intends to harm someone or any types of harm is done, or in other cases for public safety, in cases of danger, and the protection and freedom of others. So when we think about public authorities, we're primarily thinking about the state, yes? Those that are responsible. And so it's very important. I'm very glad that the Democratic Labour Party have invited me, because I would like to share that. So that when we implement policies, that we remember when we do that, we do not infringe on the rights of our citizens. That everything that we do, that every policy that we implement, that every law that we enact does not infringe on those fundamental rights. Okay? The other idea is that in terms of parental rights, so human rights, parental rights are all legal rights, as I said before. And of course, we're going to look at the main three components that primarily focuses on those areas. So in terms of the legal moral rights, and say when we say moral, some persons will say, what kind of morality are you discussing, or what kind of ethics are you discussing? But morality primarily is in terms of human conduct. And it may be in terms of how we differentiate from good actions from bad actions. There are different types of moral principles. They have utilitarian, they have ethical egoism, they have deontological, utilitarian, and we see quite a lot of utilitarian approaches because they usually think of the greater good, the happiness of the majority. And that's in some cases can be very concerning. And then you have the deontological, which primarily think that morality is objective. It does not depend on the circumstances. But in the case of parental rights, the parent, the mother, father, or legal guardian, they use those rights, those innate rights, those legal rights and political rights to guide the young, to guide the children, and of course it is their duty to make the right decisions for those children. And that is one of the reasons why we're seeing those infringements on the parental rights. Because it is the duty of the parent first and foremost, not the state. The parent decides what type of education shall my child have. The parent decides what my child will eat, even sometimes when they don't want to eat. Yes, we've had that, especially toddlers. The parent decides what home or what location that their children should live. So it's very important, those responsibilities and those rights that we have. And as most of us are here, as parents, as grandparents, as guardians of children, we understand those roles and we take those roles very seriously. Very seriously, because we know whatever we do can impact the lives, the fragile lives of those young children. The other aspect of it is that their objective, parents, is to protect the child from all forms of harm. Whether it is physical harm, whether it's spiritual harm. And I know I have a lot of grandparents here. I can see some of them nodding, yes. We pray on our children all the time. We pray for them because we believe in the spiritual realm. So it's important that we pray for them, and in some cases we teach them to pray as well. So giving children spiritual knowledge and having them understanding how they make moral decisions. So it is also the parental rights to do that, to secure the child's education, their development, to ensure that they are safe, not only at home, also in the schools and in the public spaces. Whether it's in the van stand or whether it's they going to the beach, we always ensure that our children are safe. It is our responsibility and it is also our right. So one of the things that we could think of sometimes, yes, your child is at home, your children, your grandchildren at home, so you protect them. And I remember a long time ago when it was 6 o'clock, everybody's inside, right? That doesn't happen quite often these days. Things have changed a little bit. So we give them up to 7. But the reality is that we always ensure that our children come home and they're safe. And when we send them to school, there's always that saying that the same way we send them, we want them to come back the same, but with a little knowledge, the kinds of knowledge that we expect them to have, been followed through the curriculum. So it's very important that when we think about those aspects, we look at the realities that we live in and the effect that it may have. Because as parents, we usually do what is required of us, yes? We work hard, we provide the moral education, we ensure that our children are well fed, that they are well clothed, that they are well educated. And so we follow those social as well as those economic structures within our societies to ensure that our children live a very successful life. The moral aspect is very important when we think about parental rights, because in some cases, our moral basis or our moral foundations, our moral claims, even our moral views, and when I say moral, what we teach our children through right and wrong, it may be different sometimes, but most of us hold some common views. So for instance, we tell our children, do not lie, do not steal. We teach them these things because we believe that it is important to learn these things. It is important, this is what builds good character in those children. And so as a parent, those types of responsibilities not only becomes your right, but it also becomes your duty. And that is what the moral aspect of it is. So when we think about ethics, we also thinking in terms of the morality of the individual, the parent, so that we do not sway away from what we ought to do, our responsibilities, to provide the moral guidance to our children. And as I said before, all children, not just those that live in your household, but within the community. So as a parent, these are your rights. You have the right to ensure what type of health that your child receive, health care that your child receive. Yes? And that has been quite controversial as well. The issues of vaccination. You as a parent have that right to do your own research in some cases and to determine whether you want your child to have certain types of health services, as well as moral, as well as educational. So all of those aspects is very important that we understand those rights as well. Now, what is very interesting, in the past few weeks, we've seen lots of debates on the legal component. Though most of us have understood the moral aspect, because nobody would really say, well, you know, you don't have a moral duty or responsibility to children, because most persons expect us to take care of our children and groom them and educate them in a particular way. But the legal aspect of it, the legal aspect is where a lot of parents seem to be concerned. The idea is that, what is my right as a parent? What are my legal rights as a parent? And it is one of the reasons why I advocated on behalf of parents that you seek legal counsel. Because there are sometimes parents may not understand their legal rights. And perhaps when dealing with the state, it may become a little intimidating. You may feel that I'm helpless. Perhaps this is the way that things are supposed to happen. Or, in other cases, what do I do? So in many cases, it's very important that parents understand their legal rights. And part of that legal right is the right to have respect for family life, a right to know how your child will be educated, whether it's through religious education or philosophical convictions in some cases, and the right not to be discriminated for the positions that you take. So all of those kinds of claims, again, you're seeing as we go through, as we get closer to the end of the lecture, you'll see why, when some of those rights were infringed upon, why parents have the right to take legal action. Because their rights have been infringed upon. There have been a breach between parental rights and the state. Because the state provides various, I would say, various tenets, various provisions for parents. And as I said before, in most cases, parents comply. We send them to school, we feed them, we ensure that they do not get into trouble, and we ensure that they're good citizens. But at the same time, we expect that the state respects the rights of parents. And so it's one of those concerns, again, as I said before, we will see what those types of issues are and why it's very important that we focus and stay focused on the issues at hand and do not be deterred, because it's very important. This is a very serious matter This is a very serious human right and parental right violation that we all should stand up for, because we are all parents, whether it's through biological or through community. We are all parents, and we have that right to speak out and stand up. The other aspect is that parents are connected to issues of education and, of course, child custody, access to rights, adoptions, and particularly in terms of child care. So in other words, the state has the provisions, but parents, of course, have the first and foremost responsibility. You are the first caretaker of your children. The state is there to provide support, such that if you could no longer do those provisions or duties, the state can come in and assist you. Okay? And this is some of the concerns that you would have in terms of that. One of the things that tend to highlight, particularly in the discussion, is in terms of parental rights when it comes to international law. And I think that's many times that we think that, okay, well, we in certain societies, we in Barbados, perhaps we may feel that, we don't have much choices. But remember that our country, Barbados, and other Caribbean islands have signed a lot of international treaties, yes? That they themselves have to be held accountable for. And as we've said, even in those treaties, and I'm just going to add a few of them here, so that you can see the list of those treaties that Barbados have signed when it comes to parental rights and children's rights. Quite a number of them. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, March 23rd, 1976. I wasn't even born yet. Yes, that's just to show you how long those have been there. We have also the Convention of the Rights of Children, which was signed in 1990 and ratified in October 9th, 1990, during that time as well. It's very important. And one of the things that I would like and urge persons to do, if you can get copies of those, because they're available online, have a read. Some of them are very long documents, I can understand, but it's important that we know and we are aware. Because if we're not aware of what treaties that we're signing, we're not aware of what and how they work to our advantage, then we aren't aware as to how we can help each other. Okay? So it's very important that we do that. It's very important that we hold those responsible accountable. You have signed those treaties on our behalf, which means that you can be held accountable for them. You have signed those human rights treaties. You will be held accountable if any of those treaties are breached as a people. So it's very important, as I said before, that persons are aware of what those treaties are. So I took the liberty just to highlight a few of them. I didn't go through the entire I didn't bring the entire document for you. Well, I would do it for my students, but for you, I will help. So the Declaration of Human Rights in Article 26, here's what it says. That parents have a prior rights or a priori rights, first and foremost rights, to choose the kind of education that shall be given to their children. How many of us agree to that? Yeah? Do you think it's our responsibility to know what our children are being educated on? To decide upon that? Every one of us, as I started and I told you, every one of us may have different interests. Different interests. Some of us may have interest in politics, as I said. Some of us may have interest in computers. Some of us may have interest in religious education. But what is very important is that we become aware. Yes? That our existence is acknowledged. That the parent is not seen invisible. That we are there. After all, we're the ones sending them to school. They're not going to school on their own. Give them a chance, they probably wouldn't even go. Yeah? So the parent, the role of the parent is extremely significant and paramount, particularly if you're seeking to have a developed society that reflects on the development of its people. Parents and parental right is very important and critically important. Because one of the things that we do know, apart from everything else, when it comes to education, and I say that with a very strong heart, because I remember my mom never completed secondary school. I don't think she even completed all of primary school. But one thing she did is to ensure that you went to school every single day, rain or shine. She wasn't able to read everything, but she instilled that education is what is going to change the way you see the world. And so most persons will not take this for granted. It is what creates persons, it's what allows you to think, to rationalize, to make sound decisions. Because some children will say, why do we go to school? We go into school every day, we learn the same things. But sometimes those same things that you learn is what's going to change you as a human being. So it's very important that when we think in terms of parents having that a priori kinds of right, first and foremost rights, that when you have that right, not even the state can override it. I would say perhaps only God can do that. Yes? Can determine, okay, well, I think you've done enough now. But in other cases, no. The responsibility is primarily the parents. It is your responsibility. It is your duty. It is your fundamental right. It is your legal right. So it's very important, again, as I said before, even the Universal Declaration of Human Rights highlights it because of its significance. Because of its significance for the child and for the parents and for the citizens, that it ensured that those rights are enshrined in those treaties. So when they're signing those treaties, and I'm sure our good colleague would tell us, when they sign those treaties, I'm sure they read it as well, yes? They go for it. They ensure the language and wording is there to ensure that everything is accurate. To ensure that whatever, as I said before, these were in 1976 and we're in 2020. And even, oh yes, I'm so sorry, in 2022, even to this day, it is still relevant. And so that is one of the concerns, again, they identify those fundamental rights. So the American Convention on Human Rights also speaks about parents and guardians, again, having that right for religious and moral education for their children. And that is very important, as I said before, because as we tie it in together, the types of questions that were asked, some of them we may say they were social questions, well, of course, but the majority of those questions were ethical questions. Yes? The question of harming oneself, it's an ethical question. The questions of sexuality, these are ethical questions. And in some cases, some of us now may not even be able to answer those questions. The questions of stealing from each other or stealing from persons, these are ethical questions. These are questions that judges your character. And that is why it's very important when we think about why parental consent is important. Because as I said before, it is the parent that has to guide the thinking of the young person. And of course, we live in a society where some persons say, well, you know, the children see these things all the time. It's in the media, it's in the computers, it's in the world, they hear it on the news. But most of the time when they hear it and we're around, what we tell them? Not about here. Yes? And some of us would explain it to them. Some of us would take the time. Most of us will take the time and talk to them about it. Because we know that it thinks of critical thinking in terms of, how do I make a judgment call on this? How do I make a judgment call on sexuality? How do I make a judgment call on stealing or harming someone or myself? Those kinds of questions. It requires parental intervention. And so that is one of the reasons why parental rights is very significant. It almost seems, as I said before, that parents were invisible in the process. But we cannot deny parents of those fundamental human rights, those legal rights, because it's their responsibility to ensure that children are safe in every environment, even at times safe from ourselves. Let me just give you an example. Sometimes they're doing something and you just want to. Don't do that. Don't do it. Because at times we understand the role of a parent. The role of a parent. And if we don't educate ourselves as parents, if we don't have the training in terms of how we interact with our children, sometimes, we may go a little bit overboard. And it happens quite a lot. And so the idea is that parental rights and guardian rights is very important because we want to ensure the safety of our children. And I also wanted to highlight that in some cases, when we think about children's rights, the idea is that children's rights, when we violate children or in cases where there is some form of abuse, we tend to think of abuse as something physical. Yes? If we don't see the harm on our bodies, then there's no harm. But we now understand there's psychological harm as well. There's long-term harm. There's harm that not even our generation may be able to identify as yet. And so research in itself has shown that psychological harm is just as detrimental as physical harm. And so you could imagine how some of those students may have felt to be asked those unethical questions, to be asked ethical questions that allows them to probe into areas that they have not even ventured into as yet. So it's a very deep reflection for us as a society. Perhaps this matter may allow us to think a little bit deeper in terms of how we treat our children, how we think about our children, and what can we do better in the future regarding to them. And so all of those kinds of cases we're seeing, why it's very important, why our governments signed on to those treaties, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, that they are human as well. They're just smaller. And some of them may not develop in terms of their minds as yet, their faculties. Their development is still going, and this is perhaps one of the most influential times in their lives. And so one of the aspects of the Convention Rights, particularly Article 5 and 16, where it tells us that we have to respect, that parties should respect the responsibilities, the rights and duties of the parent. What is very significant, there we're talking about children, but it again highlights the role of parents. We are the responsible ones. We are the moral agents for our children. And so even in that aspect, you've seen why the parties here is the responsible states or the government or the administrations. That you have to respect the responsibilities and the rights and duties of parents. It took them a while for them to realize that children's rights are equally important. that we cannot take advantage of them because we feel they perhaps may not be able to speak out. And I'm so proud of those students. I'm so proud of them that they spoke up and challenged the adults, that you're violating my rights. Good for them. Good for them. Had they not do that, we would have never known. We would have never known. And sometimes, the very same way that they say the children know a lot, well, they knew their rights were being violated. And I urge parents to stand with them. Stand with them. They came to you for a reason. They knew something was wrong. Stand up with them. Do not be deterred. So the very aspect of it, in terms of the community, I'm thinking again, the customs, the legal customs, of course, you have to ensure that it is consistent in this aspect that you treat every child, every single child equally, that they are protected by the state. Not some, all of them. You cannot decide who you're going to test or who, quote and unquote, will be the guinea pigs. You have to ensure that every child's rights are respected, regardless of the socio background, their moral background, where their parents work, where they live. You have to respect their rights and cannot infringe on those fundamental rights. The other aspect is that no child shall be subjected to arbitrary or unlawful interference with his or her privacy. I didn't make it up. I wasn't born yet when they did it. It's there. And they're aware of it. Those types of infringements is detrimental. If we allow those types of infringements to continue, if we allow children's rights to be violated, after all, if they couldn't violate children's rights, who are we? We have to think very deeply and very passionately about parental rights, our rights, the citizens. It is not just the parents in this situation, it's all of us. Because every single one of those children is our children as well. It didn't happen to my child or my children, my sons. They're too little. But we all can understand what it feels like if your child went through that experience. Even if some persons at this moment is claiming that, oh, the children are fine, let them go along, carol along, it's good. We're all right. It does not mean a violation has not occurred. It always asks me those philosophical questions that students usually ask. If a tree falls in the forest and there's nobody around, did the tree still fall? So even if we don't acknowledge a violation has taken place, does that mean it did not take place? These are some of the concerns that we have. That unlawful interference with the privacy of their family, their home, that may in some cases launch attacks on their honor and reputation. Some of those questions, and we don't want to go too much into detail due to the legality. The children's names, it is claimed and alleged that the children's names were on those surveys. Yeah? So you can imagine if you do a survey and you happen to see the person survey saying that, the person they steal, or what we say in our Caribbean dialect, that person thiefing. You'd want that person around you? Would you want them around you? Well, probably yes. But look every once in a while. Don't let them get too close to the purse. Yeah? Reputation. The child has a reputation. Yes, don't mind they're small. It's when they start building their characteristics and the personas as well. I remember there was a time my son said he wanted to be Sonic. It's a hedgehog with some blue hair. And for a very long time, that's who he wanted to be. I couldn't tell him it was a little hedgehog, but he figured it out later on. But the idea is that at that time, that's the time they create themselves. And so it's very important that we don't infringe on those rights. We don't interfere unlawfully on those fundamental rights. Other idea is that the child has the right to the protection of the law against those interferences. And of course, the attacks. Whether we want to admit it or not. So when we think about children's rights, we think about parental rights, we see why it is equally important. I do understand the aspect of data protection and everything else that occurred, but the fundamental aspect for me was the infringement on those fundamental rights, those innate rights, those rights that the state cannot infringe upon. Because the Data Protection Act, any government can come and say, well, people doing computers anyway, anytime computers can be hacked anyway, let's just forget about that act in and of itself. But when it comes to human right, barely. The only reason that would happen is that if you're no longer human, if you're some form of artificial intelligence, yeah. So it's very important, again, that we look at in terms of that kind of protection, that the laws must be there to protect students, parents, and the child. So the state and parental rights, parents always have legal rights that are even upheld in the Constitution. And of course, as I said before, parents have that right to direct the education of their child or their children, even in the Constitution. And so it's very important, again, that we think about why it is very important in terms of that. So very briefly, in terms of the Education Act and parental rights, we see quite a lot is happening in terms of the local Barbadian Education Act, and it's important because it seems that persons, the ministers of education, when they designed the act, it was very clear. We didn't adjust it in any time at any period, right? No, it's still there. Anybody could have access to it. And it tells us very clear what the minister's role is. It's very clear that the minister shall, in the exercise of his or her duty or function under this act, have regard to the general principle that so far as so comparable with the provision of efficient instruction and training and the avoidance of unreasonable public expenditure, the wishes of parents are to be considered in the education of the student or pupil. We can agree to that? Did they agree to that? Did the ministers of education agree to that? Did they see that act? It's here. I highlighted it. Yes, parental rights. It is there. It's always in the documents. It is there. So if we were not aware, our little eyes have to go and see where we can find it. But it is there. That the wishes of the parents, how do we attain the wishes of parents? Through consent, through dialogue. They're not invisible. They are there. So we ought to have that discussion. You ought to have some element of transparency. when dealing with children, when dealing with students in particular. They're the same, but I guess when children take on the other coat of being student, it becomes different. We left them in your responsibility. There is an agreement that we send our child or children to school. You consult us. Whatever you're going to be doing with them, you consult us. And of course, we heard the argument that, you can't consult us at everything. But if it's certain questions about morality and ethics and sociality and how ethical, I don't want to use the big word. But the idea is that you consult the wishes of the parent. Some parents may agree, of course. Some parents may agree that, yes, we think we should have those kinds of conversations with our young children. And some parents would say, no. No, not yet. Not as yet. Allow me to do that. But you give the parent that right. You give the parent that opportunity to decide on the education of the student. In the same educational act, in the Education Act, I found this was very interesting. So if the parent fails to comply, they charge you $50. Yes? But what happens if the minister fails to comply? Do they get charged $50 too? Are there provisions in the act? No. If you don't send them to school regular, if they, doing things that they ought not to do and the parents is guilty, I saw that it is there. The penalties for the parents are very clear. So perhaps with the revision or the new constitution, we can ask a question. Can we implement more of parental rights in there so it's clear? So persons are aware of those fundamental rights. Not just human rights, but also parental rights in our new constitution. Can we advocate for that? Because as far as we're hearing, it's just word of mouth. It's not going to happen again. It's never going to happen. But you may not be there the next 5 months or 2 days, or we don't know what's going to happen. It has to be enshrined. It has to be documented so that generations later will know what is expected from them. So the states and children's rights, as I said before, it's very important in terms of data protection laws and privacy rights and consent. And all of that is very important because we're having this discussion quite often. And it's been aired out and played out and lots of discussions on it. So the idea of parental rights is just part of the concern, but also the data protection laws. And I was able to identify the act in itself so that I would share with you. It's very, very recent again. Early last year. So I guess because it's, the newness of the act. But of course, it was public. It became law. It is there. So I think in legality, they say if the absence of law, the attorneys would know. Yes. And also that, in other cases, if you don't know what the law is, that doesn't give you any right not to know what it is. So it's important that we do know what it is. The Data Protection Act in itself, it tells you, particularly now with computers, and we live in a cyber world, more or less. We live in a virtual world. It's a virtual space with all types of technologies, with all types of individuals, with all types of information. It's very important that we keep updated with what is happening in the world so that people's rights are not violated online as well. Quite a lot is happening. We have violations in our various ways. We have people hacking. We have people phishing. We have all kinds of stuff that is happening on the web. So really, the idea was the act was there to regulate. And Barbados has been one of the first English-speaking Caribbean countries that was able to implement one, which is a good thing because it provides that protection. And so the idea is to regulate the collection, processing, and of course use and dissemination of personal data, your information, your private information. And of course, if you're on the internet, it's very important. People can easily use your information to do all kinds of unethical actions, yes? Identity theft, steal your information, take your credit card and purchase things by courts or wherever. Yeah? So you have to have protection over that. Persons using your information to do all kinds of things on the internet. And so the idea is that persons need protection of their privacy. You need that. It is your right, particularly on the web. And so the government implementing that act is a very good thing. It's a very good way forward to provide that additional protection, because practically now everybody has some kind of electronic device, conducting business, interacting with family, friends, and relatives and whatever. But at the same time, there's quite a lot of, as I said before, unethical practices that may occur. So on a personal level, the Act, again, it provides a legal framework for the processing of personal data. And of course, the data controller and of course data processor are the ones, the legal entities that can engage in that as well. So the Act is very clear. It gives the stipulations in terms of what is required, the data commissioner, the responsibility and the roles and everything else that comes with it as well. But what is very important and what I was able to identify is that in all of those kinds of cases, it's always important to look at the consent of the individual. Consent is primarily important, even in those cases, even with the use of computers, even with the use of personal information. Even with the use of personal information. So there are lots of claims that, well, if it's not in the Constitution as yet, well, you know, we may not have infringed the rights, but however, all of those kinds of arguments can be debated. But from my perspective, I believe that every individual have the right to privacy when it comes to the personal data. Yes? Unless if it has something to do with public safety, in that sense, we can understand what would happen then. In terms of consent, data processing, again, is considered lawful. It is considered lawful where the data subject, and the data subject could be ourselves, the individuals they're collecting the information from, has given consent to the processing of their personal data. I don't know if minors can give consent. And that is going to be a little problematic. That is a little problematic because when we think about minors, even the law tells you at what age they're considered children. And so in that case, you think of the individual, we're thinking of adults, you have to give consent in terms of the processing of your data. And sometimes you're online and you want to download some information, it tells you, would you like to save or would you like to download? And most of us just click OK. Oh, we love to do that. We click that OK because we want whatever that it is. But at the end of the day, sometimes they may save your, your cookie or wherever you are, send you all kinds of information that you don't need. But what is very important is that you consent. Every individual have that right. And persons, as I said before, you have the right to say no, or you have the right to say yes, go ahead. But at the end of the day, it is you as the individual to provide consent. And the Data Protection Act tells you that. It tells you very clearly. I don't think there's any big legal language or terms or jargons that we don't understand here. It's right here. That the subject matter or data subject have to be given consent to the processing of their personal data. Okay? And so that's it again, more things to think about. More things to think about in terms of all the various facets of this matter. And why we as a people have to be more alert and challenge when those infringements are occurring. Because if the laws are there to prohibit certain types of behaviors, it does not immune other persons, right? They didn't make the law for just a few of us. Yeah. It's here for all of us. And it means that we all have to follow it. And part of what it is as a citizen is that if we follow good governance and we follow good laws and legislation, that we'll have a good society. But we can't allow others to, violate laws and violate policies and violate various infringements of human rights. And it's considered okay. So the other aspect, again, in all those cases, we're seeing that consent is very important, and it continues to tell you that in terms of consent and why consent is important for every aspect of it. Sensitive personal data, the Act speaks about it again. In Section 9 tells you that as well. The processing of sensitive personal data is only permitted. The very first one tells you that, straight out. The data subjects, again, gives consent. It's very clear. And the absence of children, I guess minors can give consent, so it means that the parents, that is where your parental rights comes in. Okay, and all of those are the kinds of cases we're seeing why it is important for us to highlight parental rights as well. Again, the Act speaks about children's data. It's there. The Act defines a child as anyone under the age of 18. Yes, it is there. And it also tells us that the processing of a child's personal data will be lawful only where and to the extent that consent is given or authorized by whom? By the parent, a guardian of the child. My brothers and sisters, we have a lot to think about. And I'm glad that we got the opportunity to go for it. I'm glad that we had the time to look at the acts, look at the laws, look at those current laws. That is very clear. And why infringements were done and violated. And I will just bring up, and all of these others, I can send you to them. So all these rights and other rights, which covers all of this, is part of the Data Protection Act. It tells you that rights to prevent processing likely to cause damage or distress. So it's very important that when we speak about those various types of parental rights, it's very important. Now, this is a part I think most of us didn't want to discuss, but it's also part of the Act. Section 93 speaks about compensation. So share it with your parents. They have that right. Section 93 of the Act provides an individual who have suffered damage or distress. It's right there. And I just highlighted the compensation part so that it becomes a little bit more obvious for some persons, more visible. So this is an act that was passed. Yes, and it is there. Okay? And of course, there's also a penalty. There is a penalty for persons who violate the act. It is also there. For those who, it tells you about compensation if your rights are violated, and it also tells you if somebody violates it, which would be the data processors. So we're not going to highlight who the data processors are. They would probably know. It tells you the penalties. For those who, it's right there. And I'm just going to just add one more slide to it so that you have some idea as to what it is. So Section 59 actually tells you part of the Act, the Data Protection Act, and why is it important for that. So essentially, there's quite a number of concerns. And as a human rights advocate, I am always observant when those violations take place, because it is my responsibility and also our responsibility to stand up and speak about them when they do occur. So that something which is very important on an ethical basis is it gives persons the opportunity for redress. We've done something wrong, we're sorry, but there's redress, atonement of the wrong or the harm that has been done. So it's something that we have to think of. We have to think deeply and internally of the harms that have been done, why we should always uphold human rights, because if we uphold human rights, those fundamental human rights, chances are we will not be in the circumstances that we are in today. Thank you, my brothers and sisters. So I think this is the opportunity where you get to ask questions or concerns or comment, and I will try to see if I can answer most of them for you. We also have a legal person who will be able to assist as well. So feel free, please, we're all family. Please feel free to ask any questions or concern from the media or anyone who's here. You are free to ask. Yes. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am. I want to really thank you for that very comprehensive, information you got. I just want to support the point of consent, because I know even within a school setting, and we want to take students to away from the conform, that the parents must consent to allow us to take children away from conform, which is really 90% for the
Yes.
teaching.
Yes.
So consent, even as simple as it is,
Yes.
for students to take it off conform,
Yes.
that has to be given by the parents.
Right.
The
Thank
question I want to ask is, the international bodies must be aware of the conventions and the rights and all the arguments that relate to provision of children and in general the rights of people, the universal rights that we're speaking to. How is it then that an institution like IABB could propose such for students when they are aware, they must be aware of the Convention on the Rights of the Child and all the other implications of it? How could they then propose such a questionnaire or survey or test, what they want to call it, for students who in our Caribbean or Barbadian society will have an education act that encompasses what happens in school and will face, what exactly would be a concern that could arise?
Thank you. Thank you for your question. I did say questions, not difficult ones, though. But it is a very serious matter, particularly when you have those international organizations. We have seen what has happened in the press in terms of providing an apology. An apology is almost an atonement that I have done something wrong. And as I have advised parents, seek legal counsel on the matter. It is important because I am quite sure that parents may not understand, some parents may not understand the ramification of what may have occurred. I would also believe that it is also up to our leaders to have some conversations with international bodies who in some cases come to assist us in various areas, but at the same time they may not understand our culture the way that it is. So it's very important. And as you said, rightfully, it's an international, because I'm quite sure such matters will not occur in other societies. And so we have to, what we're doing right now is the right thing that we're doing, challenging it. Regardless of what organization that it is, you challenge it. Why? Because your children have been harmed, your other members in societies have been harmed, and you do have the right to to be very careful. You have the right to take them to task. You have that right. And so I hope parents do take that into consideration. I hope we share the concerns of parents, and I also hope that our leaders look into the aspect of including parental rights in our new constitution, so that such matters will not occur, so that we make them accountable for those kinds of cases. Thank you for your question, ma'am. Okay. Well, we'd hope not. Well, as a philosopher, I usually tell persons that you have to gather all information first and foremost. You never dismiss any idea or position. You see where they're coming from, you see what information they're coming with, and then you do very much like most persons do, go directly to the source. The act is there. It is available. We may not understand all the legal jargons in there, not the legal terms in there, but I'm sure if we take a little dictionary somewhere, we'll be able to understand what is happening. In terms of the parents, I do understand, I mean, of course, if you have to seek legal counsel, there is a cost. There is a cost. But as a human rights advocate, as I can say, we are willing to assist the parents. And I think I will just leave it right there.
Good afternoon, and I want to thank you for that empowered enlightenment presentation that you did. I am an educator, and I know the Act, and I totally agree with a lot of things that you have said. That's why I came. But my thing is to allude to the guy here and to the lady there. For any simple thing we do as teachers, we have to have written consented permission. So I'm a girl guide. If I want to take my children on a hike, I have to get permission for that. And we had a situation sometime before COVID where some people like me, guiders, took children out camping and did not seek permission. And that was a whole big hullabaloo in the ministry, in the child care board, etc., etc. My thing is, this is something 20,000 times greater than this, than taking your child out on a camp without permission. And I'm not seeing anything from the powers that be, okay, being done. And I am an advocate myself, and on a lot of stuff, because I believe in life, especially if you're dealing with the future, which is the next generation, you have to be very, tread very easily. You have to be truthful. And I'm not seeing a lot of truth in this country right now. And the people apparently who speak the truth and stand for truth are victimized. But because I stand on the side of God, He will, obviously keep me going. But I want to say that I teach privately, and I had 4 children who did this test who are traumatized, and because they are from homes, again, because remember, all children are not from homes that have the wherewithal and the know-how and the understanding, the empathy and all that to work with their children. So some of us have sought information for these parents and for these children, because, as I said, because a lot of these children come from homes where there are already domestic issues and domestic problems. This now mounts upon top of it. So my thing is that for something like this, I really do think that the ball has been dropped big time, bigger than the Super Bowl. And I really do think that people need to get up and stand up for what is right. Unfortunately, we don't live in a world where if you buy a tin of condensed milk, when I was living in England, if you bought a tin of condensed milk, you can go on Speaker's Corner and talk about the dent in the milk in the tin. Okay, and I really do believe that that is what should be done, because not for the condensed milk, but for this what's happening. And a group of us who think like me, out the box, we are planning to do that, because at the end of the day, for me, my scriptures has taught me that you have to stand up for what is right. Okay? It is not about friendship. I told my husband, who's a teacher, I said, I don't even mind if you divorce me if I stand up for what is right. Okay? So I'm saying until we start to do that in our pockets and our groups and actually do it, because I know that I have a cousin that lives in Trinidad, and all I know, so it will be pandemonium. But I'm saying if we are to really look out for our children's future, okay, when in 20, 30, 40 years, some of us are in heaven looking down, we want to see that righteousness prevailed. And I am one. I don't follow the crowd. And I have a group of people, because we are planning our own soapbox protest. Okay? As I said, thank you very much. I don't believe that we should do things because of friendship or because I belong to a pink box or a green box or the big church down the road or the little church up in Christchurch. I believe in truth and righteousness, especially our youth. Because if they don't have anybody to stand up for what is right now, what will happen in 20, 25 years when they grow up with a mentality, well, you know what? Everything is quite okay. This is what happens. So that is why I really made it here today. I have to go and teach now, and I am keeping my children very abreast of things, because I talk to my children about the truth and about what is right, because they are the next leaders of this country. And you and I have a duty, okay, to do the right thing. And if it's already there in the act before you and I were born, okay, that is what I have to follow. So I just wanted to share that here today, and I really am really inspired and ignited once more again with your presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. You inspire me too now. So the question about I'm just trying to be so technical at the same time. There's sometimes when we speak languages, you speak the language that people understand. And the language that the state understands is the law. They're the legislators. And so my advice again, and I will say that until I have no more breath, is that the parents, we do understand your challenges, because sometimes you may feel that, you know, it's something we call paternalism, where the parent, you know, the state, you kind of look at the state as, you know, a parent, and the state has done so much for you. But if you did something that was wrong, you did something that was unethical in some cases, not too much, but if you did something illegal or unlawful, what do you think is going to happen to you? You know, they'll come and look for you. They will come. The reality is, yes, it may not take a group of persons, and you may understand if some parents do not want to, or you may understand, and please understand that some persons in the society have not fully grasped what has happened. So we have to give them some time. Because for them, as I said before, they think abuse or violations, it has to be something physical. Until you see a child cry or come to you and say, well, I don't know how I feel that somebody tell me what it was like to kill myself or something like that. So the reality is, even if it takes one parent to stand up and say, well, no, I'm going to challenge the state, and we will go where we both speak the same language. I'm not going to determine, because what is seem to be happening, and I know I'm kind of small, but, I can fight for myself and others. But the reality is that we cannot allow fear to deter us. Because if you do that, it will mean that when people do things that are harmful and wrong, then it will be acceptable. So we cannot do that. If it means one person has to stand up, let that one person stand up and support them. Even if you have to hide in secrecy and support them, allow that person to stand up. And also, do not take this is not a political issue. We are here today because you invited me. I'm so happy that I came. But this is not a political issue. And if you've noticed, there are people that are not even involved in politics and are concerned. And because of that concern, we're saying that we need to take legal action. And I will again remind the parents that there is help. There is help. You're not going to do it on your own. Felicia Dujon and a lot of other persons are here. There is help. Do not be fearful. And I remember one time somebody asked me, well, persons involved have apologized, and they said it's not going to happen anymore. But you can almost imagine if somebody hurts you and abuses you, and they decide what the punishment should be. Okay? I'm going to hit you well, Just give me 2 lashes and I'm okay. It doesn't work that way. We allow an independent thought, which is the court, to decide on whether parents were harmed, whether their rights were violated, and of course to decide what course of actions to take. So even if there are certain persons in society that are calling for resignation, are calling for this, allow the courts to determine those aspects, because we can't take word of mouth. It can change. We cannot let one person decide what the consequences should be. Okay? We have to allow the right processes to engage, because if we don't do that, then we can almost question transparency and accountability. So the parents, I would urge them to do the right thing for your child, even if you don't want to do it for yourself. Do it for the child and allow the child to get the redress because of the harm that was done. Allow that. Allow good sense to prevail. And for the persons who are the leaders and the persons within the society that are making the decision, allow good moral judgment to prevail, or else you will be on the wrong side of history with this matter. Yes, sir.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, sir.
Let me bring a different spin to this. I accept the apology from the ministry. The ministry was all for this test. Have you followed what has happened in Canada? The ministry is following this test. The only reason the ministry come out and apologize is because the journalists from Barbadians today is so bring to the public domain. So the backpedaling, and we need to keep the focus on. Right now, the Minister of Education is in Guyana. Okay. Yes, she's in Guyana on some seminar, and the Chief Education Officer is on duty leave, whatever that means. On duty leave. A serious situation like this, both of them in Guyana, that means they ain't care. And we need to keep the pressure up. And I join that march tomorrow. I be in that march tomorrow. Okay. I ain't have no children, but I'll be there tomorrow.
But, thank you, sir. But it's not also the fact of, because yes, we can do all of that, and yes, that is important as well. But what is most insignificant, important, because sometimes I say, yes, we like the march, because sometimes my feet hurt, and I don't want to be doing that all the time. Let's get it documented. It has to be done the right way, sir. because we'll be matching until we can't match anymore. And people will say, well, you know, they will tell us not about here and it will still occur. We have to do things the right way. And the only way that we can do it is that we know what the law says, we know the violations have taken place. What is the next step? When some form of illegality or violation of human rights is done, what do? It is great we're going to walk and speak, but some of us don't have to walk. We will walk other places. We will allow the pen and paper to walk, because this is a language that the state understands, that you cannot infringe on the basic rights of parents and assume that parents are going to put their good shoes and keep walking in the hot sun to ensure that you do not do those things again. It has to be done the right way. And the right and appropriate way is to ensure the legal ramification is done. And I think that is where I will stand strong and keep saying, do not be deterred. Stand up where your legal rights are. These are your legal rights as parents, and you should ensure that you do what is right on your end. Because had it been you on the other end, they would have called the law for you. Okay?
My concern in this whole situation is that the Ministry of Education had concern with 167 questions out of 300, which means there's more than half that they had a problem with. And then for there to allow the IDB to come and take over the schools, you know, they didn't share it with them. They put out the head teachers, put out the teachers, and they took over the classroom, which means that they couldn't even get a chance to see that the questions wasn't taken out. Which means that if it was me, I would have had to get the 300, or if them change them up, review them before that they put them to the children. So my concern is that they're responsible for our children, and they're neglected to make certain that their concerns, not ours, because up to that time we didn't hear anything about it, that their concerns were rectified, and then to come now and could only apologize after the IDB apologized first, you know. It ain't that when they break, they come and apologize. Well, we didn't get a chance to scrutinize them before they give the children. The pressure was on, people was complaining, the IDB come up and apologize, and then they fall apart. So I'm saying that for neglecting their responsibility, they can't expect that just an apology because I'm a person that does put apologies in two categories. One is voluntary and the other one is involuntary. And if I mash you or I bounce you and I say, well, sorry, I'm sorry, but as you go sleep on it or be persuaded to do it and follow some, I can't accept that. So to me, it is not an apology because it was not forthcoming, and they neglected their duty to look after our children. Okay. And to be honest with you, I've got a grandson that now gone into one of the schools too, and I was going for his mother fuming. Yeah, okay. But I get to him before her, and I ask him if he is sick, if he sick either the test or the survey too, and he said no. And obviously I bite back. But probably if they get to her for probably when you know. So I'm saying that these things should not happen because the children, we put them in their care, and they, as everybody said, dropped the ball, and now trying to piggyback behind the IDB. But I thank you.
Thank you, sir, for sharing that as well. But just to add what you just said, building upon that, we can look at in terms of administrative negligence. There are lots of legal ramifications there that we can look at and see what, and as I said before, we have to look at the legality of parental rights and how they were violated. Yes, sir?
Good afternoon, Miss
sir.
Dujon. Just have two questions basically to ask you. First question, what would you say to the humanists that you've been hearing recently speaking against even a lot of what you're saying? And also even speaking against as far as what Dr. Veronica Clark, who was recently ostracized on a well-known radio program by a particular moderator who is kind of in between some of the rights that you would have laid out there and described. We want to know what you would say to the humanists that may be listening to this online. And they even had two individuals that are counselors that said that as far as the human rights is concerned and the rights of children, which you hear talked about a lot, they were also saying that they don't really see nothing wrong. That they're saying that this is something that's been going on within children. If we don't teach them, how would they know if you may be born in one way, but really and truly in reverse psychological way, you are something else on the inside, but it just has to be expounded. What would you say to ideological ignorance like that is being spouted by these so-called intellectuals that I would call them? And to agree with what my comrade here would have said, that apology was weak and it was lame and it was just as fake as the two individuals that gave the apology. But I want to hear from you what you would say about that. And the Data Protection Act that I mean, for instance, they said that they were going to get rid of that, they weren't going to burn these things, but yet they're in some vault. Okay. They say they were going to destroy them, not burn, they were going to destroy, but they were saying in some vault. So, yeah, there are a lot of things that are going into question here. They say one thing, but they're actually doing something else. Okay. So I want to hear what you got to say to those people.
Thank you for your two comments and questions. For the humanists, I tend to, and I would like to encourage persons. Everybody, as I said before, even my first few discussions, everybody has a different position on life. Yeah, people see things differently. Some people like cuckoo, some people don't. Some people like flying fish, some people don't. Some people like fried chicken and all the other stuff, people don't. People see life differently. People judge things differently. And as a result, we cannot penalize people for that. We cannot be too harsh on people for that because people see things differently. When it becomes problematic, it's when you want to impose it on other people. So the very much same way that we may want to impose our beliefs on other people, they may want to do the same. So I believe in such a cases, we have to allow people, and I believe in the right to life, the right to self-interest. Because if we go around just saying, well, you can live this way, but not that way, you can live this way, but not that way, then the other question is, well, what is God going to say about that too, How is he or she going to feel about that? So the reality is that I think sometimes even ourselves, we do things that may be considered unethical to some people. Our actions may seem different from other people, but that does not mean we have to ostracize persons because every human voice is important. Yes, we can agree to that? Mm-hmm. Every human voice, every position is valid. Unless if you look into harm other persons, then we may have a problem with that. Now, in cases of persons saying that the child, very much what I highlighted, that the children may have heard it before, they maybe experienced it before, or maybe part of, the whole idea of the whole conversation with, well, our children they know a lot more that we know. There are still minors. Even if we hear children having certain conversation or we see them, they're still minors, and we have to respect that from that perspective as well. In such a case, what could have occurred is that if those questions are going to be asked, counselors should have been available. Parents should have been notified. Their consent should have been given because perhaps a parent would say, well, Jimmy always looking at those things anyway. Jimmy is familiar with certain language. While in other persons may say, no, Kim is not into that kind of discussion. every parent may know their child differently than the teachers and down the counselors, yes? So to place what we're doing indirectly, and those persons who are doing that have to be very careful. Because what we're doing, indirectly we were saying that it is the children's fault that they got the survey. Why? Because, you know, they're old enough, they're mature enough, they should be able to read that. We're placing the blame the wrong places. It should be redirected to the adults that are responsible for them. It should not be our concern as to what level of maturity or whether the children are aware of it or not. We're shifting blame. That's what we're doing. So now we're making the children responsible. Oh, they should have known that anyway. It's not going to harm them. We're shifting the blame as adults rather than place the blame where it should be. Focus on where it should have been. The adults are responsible for the children. They should have known that they should have gotten parental permission. That was not done. We blame or place exactly what is required where it's supposed to be. Leave the children out of it. They've already encountered much from what their various errors that we've made. We want to look at it as human error. We need to stop shifting the blame from those who were charged to be responsible for our children. And I think that is what we should be saying at this moment. Stop shifting that blame and making children, oh, they're the ones. No, it's not. What do they know? Children are going through all those various life experiences at that age now. They do not even know why they did the test in the very first place. Did they explain to them why they're doing the test? No. Did they tell them what kinds of concerns they would have? Did they have any kind of counseling after? We, the adults, need to take responsibility for our actions, not the children. Okay, sir? Any more questions or concerns? One more question? Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I wanted to find out if persons like you that are activists and so, if you have sought out the children who were traumatized by this and who may have had parents who really don't understand the level that those children would have been traumatized. That I think that's something that we need to do. Search them out, and many of them may not have access to a lawyer or what. So I think that's something that we need to do, and don't let us just die like that, because some parents really do not understand what has happened, you know. Several parents do not really understand. They may just, just let go. But I think this is something that we need to follow up. We can try to find out some of these children who have been traumatized and go to at least help parents to understand the level of they've been traumatized. I mean, it's not something you can just let.
We will be doing that. We will be doing that. And something that I saw in the media as well is that I believe that the parent body is saying they're not sure if they may want to take legal action. It is not up to the parent body to decide that. It is up to the individual parents. It is up to the individual parents, and as I said, in the next few weeks we'll be making public announcements in terms of how parents can reach out to us. As I said before, in some cases we will be assisting parents. We will be reaching out to them. We understand in terms of the cost, in terms of legality, we will be assisting parents. It is our duty to do that. And I think if the most of us continue to support parents and inform them, they will know. The idea is that mostly, particularly in the Caribbean, when something harmful happens, particularly to children and to even ourselves, it's easy to just brush it off. We don't even seek counseling. We don't even seek help. We have to change that. We have to change that kind of thinking. We have to change those who make us think that way to tell them no. If you are harmed or we are harmed in any way or our rights are infringed upon, we can seek legal redress and we can seek help. we can seek help. So it's important that we have those conversations. I also would encourage you to encourage others. At this moment, like I said, it's a very serious matter. Of course, there's so much other things happening in the world, but this perhaps is one of the first times that we've had such a magnitude of child violation rights in Barbados. Okay, and I want to leave on that note. Thank you again for having me, and please continue to remain safe.
Good afternoon to everyone. First of all, let me thank Ms. Dujon for acceding to our request from the organizers of these series of lectures. Of course, in the honor of our fallen comrade, Astor B. Watts. I want to thank you so much for acceding to our request. Of course, you brought another perspective on the subject that has been confronting us over the last number of weeks. You brought some clarity to the subject matter, and of course of the rights of parents, the guardians, the children, and the wards of our country. And of course explaining the implications of maintaining those rights, and of course ensuring that those rights are not breached. You further emphasize the fundamental rights must be respected and observed, and commended our children for speaking up, because were it not for them speaking up, we would still be in the dark. So I want to thank you very much. You brought an excellent perspective. I want to thank all those of you who took time out from your busy schedules to be here with us for this lunchtime lecture. I want to encourage you to come back. I see some new faces, and I want to encourage you to join us, because we have an excellent series of lectures and subject matters and lecturers. And I want to encourage you to come back in the future and join us here. Those online who have been listening to us, I want to thank you also for taking time out to enjoy our streaming. We have been working towards improving our quality, and I am sure that you would be extremely happy in what you saw and heard this afternoon. Also, a thank you to the organizing committee of these lectures, Paul Gibson and his other comrades, for putting their heads together and in not only conceptualizing most of what you heard today, what you will see and hear in the future in the series of lectures. So again, thanks so much. And the members of the press, you play an integral role in helping us to disseminate the information of our lunchtime lectures, and I want to thank you, those press and of course media houses who also attended here this afternoon. Again, thanks so much.